Hi, Alyssa. Thank you so much for coming on the Thrival Nutrition podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I am glad you're here to talk about poop today.
Yes.
So
It's
we're
such an
getting,
important topic, and I just love talking about poop and really breaking down the stigma around the topic because it's something we all have to do. It
right?
things like we just need to be able to get comfortable with it because it really shows us what's going on in our bodies. That's why I love talking about
Yes, I know. When I sit down with clients, I'm like, tell me about your poop. And they
it.
look at me weird. And I'm like, I promise, like, I'm not just asking. It tells you a lot about your body. And before we get started, introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Alyssa Labrecque, and I'm the owner of Soul Food Nutritionista, and I'm a nutritionist. And what I do is I work with people in helping to end the gas and bloating and banish the diarrhea and constipation so that they can finally feel normal, fit in their clothes, and start to live their life again.
I love that. Okay, so constipation is what we're mainly talking about. I know that you hit on like diarrhea and all these others, but constipation for sure is a big issue. I find it crazy that some people are like, no, I go like every 2 to 3 days. And I'm like, what? You're supposed to be going every day. So it is a big issue. So why are people getting constipated in the first place?
That's a really great question. I just want to backtrack for a second because you touched on something really important. I find that a lot of people don't even realize what constipation really looks like. And so when, we say, oh, you're only going to, every 2 to 3 days, to them, that seems, like, well, isn't that normal? And so I always like to kind of clarify what that looks like. And so it's really important to make sure that you're going 2 to 3 times a day. And that's where I get usually like the jaw drop look. And I always sort of give the example of if you go to a car wash, 2 cars go in, how many cars should come out? And it's the same thing with when we eat. 2 to 3 cars or meals are going in. We should have 2 to 3 bowel movements coming out. Of course, you're probably snacking in between, but generally speaking, 2 to 3 times a day. And then your texture is really important too. So if you're straining, even if you're going 2 to 3 times a day, but you're straining and they're hard pellet poops, you're still erring on the side of constipation. So it's not just the frequency, but texture too. And so we'll talk about that. But why do people really get constipated? It's multifaceted. There's many things that contribute to constipation. But a couple of the ones that I like to address right off the top is dehydration. Often people aren't drinking enough water. And so I always tell my clients, what is your weight? Divide that by 2, and that should give you the number of ounces of water you should be drinking in a day, roughly. If you're drinking coffee, then we need to, double your water intake. For every 1 coffee, you need 2 waters. And so dehydration is a really common.
I like your equation. That makes it really simple to think too.
Yeah, for sure. And like I always say, most people don't drink in ounces. So, pull out the Google and
Right.
how
Siri.
much is 60 ounces in liters or mils or whatever you drink in. But that's a really great rule of thumb to help you determine how much water you should be drinking in a day. So dehydration is a huge factor. Lack of fiber, not getting enough fiber in the diet. And that's not just, vegetable sources. It could be things like ground flax or chia seeds or psyllium husk. These are some other options for sources of fiber for you. So I typically recommend that people get about 24 to 25 grams of fiber per day. And I'm not suggesting you need to go get a calculator and measure that hard.
Right.
Fast, but a good rule of thumb is to get about 6 to 8 servings of vegetables per day, and then actively adding in ground flax, chia seeds, and fibers like those. That will safely get you to the amount of fiber you need to help really support healthy bowel movements. And there's 2 other quick ones I want to touch on. Food sensitivities and inflammatory foods are definitely a contributor. The best way to take care of that is to perhaps look into having food sensitivity testing done. These sorts of foods that aren't agreeing with your body create inflammation, and your body can't digest them and process them. So it can create and contribute to a constipated state.
Yeah.
And the last one, which is, I find, the most important one, is the emotional end of things, which often doesn't get addressed when it comes to constipation. I find that the majority of people that are experiencing constipation are going through some sort of stress in their life as well. And that stress obviously leads to maybe not eating the healthiest foods, or maybe not getting all your vegetables in. It contributes to maybe leaning on more coffee instead of water.
Yep.
So it definitely, leads to dehydration and lack of fiber. But it's also been shown how, let's say you are bottling things, or you're not willing to let something go, this can reflect in your bowel's health. And so it can look like constipation. And research and studies have actually shown that there's this emotional connection with the bowels. And that's kind of where we tend to hold and bottle our emotions.
I think I remember learning about that in psychology, actually.
Yeah.
That is crazy. And I definitely agree with dehydration. People don't drink enough water. I'm one of those people that it's really hard. Like, I have to force myself. Like, I have to have something by me all the time, because if I don't, I will definitely go all day without drinking. Like, that's why I never became like a drinker of like alcohol. I seriously can't even finish like, I have to force myself. I can't even finish like a glass of wine. Like, I know some people that are just like, throw them back. I'm like, nope, I can't even do one. So I know you talked about like what can, make us and get us constipated. Is there anything else that makes us constipated? Maybe that you didn't touch on, certain foods or.
Yeah. So that's a really great point. And I mean, it's going to be custom and unique to each individual person. But again, going back to those food sensitivities and inflammatory foods, there are foods that we know tend to be more constipating than others. And so whether we have a sensitivity to them or not, and that's a really important piece, whether you have a sensitivity to them or not, I say it again, dairy and gluten are inflammatory foods, and we often see them being a big factor in constipation. And so that usually triggers some people, because there's some people out there that think that it's just a fad, right? Like, dairy-free, gluten-free, these are just fads. People are jumping on the bandwagon, it'll pass. But again, studies have really shown that these are inflammatory foods, and they can absolutely create irritation in the bowel.
Yes. And I don't even like to say gluten-free. I always say like wheat, because there's so many other proteins like gliadin, and there's so much more to wheat than just gluten.
You're right.
That is inflammatory to us. And I feel that I know that I think you've listened to my episode of food sensitivity, and there's so many food sensitivity tests that are out there. And I know it's so compelling to want to buy that $99 food sensitivity test. But obviously looking actually into foods that give us those mediator inflammatory cytokines, all those things are actually the foods that we're sensitive to. So I tell people not to waste their money, because I don't want to get a subpar one that just tests IgG. And then it's like, but are you really sensitive?
Yes.
And then you're kind of throwing money out the window, because you're not even sure 100% if it's actually causing like inflammation.
Yeah, and that's why I reached out to you specifically about that episode, because I was like, yes, you're hitting so many great points. And so I encourage all your listeners, if you haven't listened to it, to go back and listen to that episode, because you really talk about some important points around food sensitivity testing and what exactly to be looking for. So
for sure. I'm going to post in the show notes so people can easily like reference back and stuff.
Great.
So talk to us about why it's so bad not going, today.
So I just want to talk about some of the anxiety that people get around, using public washrooms or even going to the bathroom in general. I've had a lot of clients, especially those suffering from any sort of irritable bowel disease like Crohn's and colitis, and even IBS. It becomes a really silent disease that you kind of suffer in silence. And a lot of people don't like to talk about their bowel movements. And so it also becomes a really uncomfortable thing to then go and do sometimes for some people. And so it leads to holding your bowels, and that becomes a really problematic thing. And in even escalated states, and some of my clients have had clients withholding water and food so that they limit the amount of bowel movements that they have. So these are some really important things to look at. That again, there's nothing wrong with going to the bathroom. And I just want to revalidate that 2 to 3 times a day, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, this is a healthy amount of stool. So some of the things that can really come from constipation is a whole host of escalated illnesses or diagnoses. If you don't have any of that yet, or, we don't want to get there, but really addressing constipation is the prevention to IBS, which then can lead to Crohn's or colitis or both, or hemorrhoids, bleeding. These are really important things that need to be addressed. And I always say when a client comes to me, if constipation is present, that's the number one thing that we have to address.
Yeah.
Because if you can imagine, if your body's,
in general,
your body's shut down, your liver is working really hard for you. We want to love our livers because it's working so hard to filter through the toxins from your body and then sending it to be eliminated through the stools. And the challenge when you're not properly eliminating these stools is those toxins end up being reabsorbed into the blood system, and it creates an extremely toxic body. Now, what does that look like in the form of symptoms? It could be your skin's breaking out. It could be headaches or migraines. This is a really common one for people. And any sort of inflammation, bloating, gas, and the list is large, right? I mean, a lot of symptoms actually, in fact, go back to the digestive system. Yeah. So addressing your bowels is really important because this constipation can lead to many more severe imbalances.
Yes. And just like you said, with the toxins like being reabsorbed, so are hormones, because we excrete hormones, our liver and then to our stool, but we can reabsorb them, causing a hormonal imbalance, and then having estrogen, excess estrogen dominance and all that stuff. And so it is like, you have to poop, and people are nervous about it, because you can hear people like, I have to pee, like, can we stop or whatever. Yeah. But if someone has to poop, like, no one's just like, hey, I gotta poop, can you stop? It's like very weird. I don't know why that is. Yeah, so I even try to just be really open about it, of like, hey, if I'm working out with someone, hey, I have to poop before I go, just go and I'll meet you. Like, I wish that stigma wasn't there. I don't know why it was there. Maybe because it was such a private thing. I'm not really sure, but I feel that it should be more open. It's a natural thing. We all do it. Like, yay, go poop.
Sure. I feel like it's like a whole other talk, but like there's this whole thing for women too that I think we're really taught that it's not clean, it's not proper, you're not supposed to smell, you're supposed to be, like perfume, and it's totally cool for our boyfriends or our husbands or our brothers or our fathers to be pooping and tooting and all these things around us, and it almost is like a family sport. But when it comes to women, it's like it's supposed to be discreet and hidden and very hush hush, and that's been such a disservice to not only our women, but even it's been projected on a lot of men too. It's not just women, but generally speaking, a lot of women experience this. And so it's an important topic to talk about.
Yeah. Even like you said, even farting, like even that's like a very like taboo thing. And okay, it's silly and kids giggle, whatever. But for the most part, like, we shouldn't have to hold that in if, for say, we're hanging out with people, whatever, but it's weird. So you do, and it's causing more harm than good, obviously.
Yeah, even just the terms, right? I find because I talk about poop so much, people get really uncomfortable with it. And I've done some guest blogging for people and use the word gas, and they're like, this is a little bit rude. I think we should change this to flatulence. And I'm like, let's just call it what it is, right? Like, it's shit, it's poop, it's whatever you want to call it. It's gas, it's flatulence, it's, blowing air, like whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's a bodily function. And so this is fundamentally where these sorts of self-conscious, low self-esteem tendencies come from, is when we are infused with shame around bodily functions.
Yes. And I think even in other countries like China, or like, I think that's like a compliment, like, flatulence or something, like after you eat. And that's just us always turning things around to make it harder than it is. And what does our poop tell us about our health? I know we touched on it a little bit, but what does it say?
So I love going in like to all the dirty details. And so everything from texture to smell to shape, all of that really matters. And so when we, talk about we'll start with texture, let's say. If you're finding that you have to flush the toilet twice and you have to wipe like more than 2 times or more than 3 times, then we need to talk about your poop, because what this really tells me is that there's dampness in your colon and there's very likely too little fiber happening in the diet. And so one of the things that I always use that as an indicator for is, okay, like let's add some ground flax into my smoothie. Let's maybe up my salad intake today. Let's maybe put some chia seeds, make a chia pudding, and begin to adjust the diet based on your poo. And so texture is a really great one. The other thing is, is there mucus happening in your stools? We need to talk about that. This is a real sign of inflammation happening in the bowels, and you want to address that immediately, because that inflammatory state absolutely leads to IBS and irritable bowel diseases. So let's talk about it. And it's not meant to scare you. It's about being preventative.
Yeah.
The smell, let's talk about the smell, right? Like the stinkier you are, don't be embarrassed, but know that the smellier it is, the worse your brand, then then know that this is a sign of the toxic load in your body. And so again, we can go back and support elimination. Let's maybe love your liver a little bit more. Add some lemon juice first thing in the morning to help with that detox process and really help to stimulate bowels and moving. So these are some of the things that can really be reflected in your bowels.
Yeah. What about, because I know sometimes with poop, obviously, like it goes in the water, right, in the toilet, and it's fine. But I know people that that they're like, no, it's when it goes in the water, it's fine. But if it's like stuck kind of like on the toilet out of the water, obviously it has more of a stench than if it goes into the water. So what are your thoughts about that?
So for me, like when you're getting that sticky poo, that's that like, 2 flusher, 3 wiper, that kind of thing. That's to me, again, that goes back to that dampness in your colon, and we need to look at fiber. And so I would really bring it back to there's too much dampness. Add some flaxseed. I personally find ground flax tends to work a little bit better in getting the bowels moving. Chia seeds are great. I'll touch on psyllium husk. Psyllium is really great, but I caution people to start with a small amount, like 1/4 of a teaspoon, because it tends to be more bulking. So it's going to really help to form your stool, which is important. But we don't want to take too much of it where it ends up bunging you up even more.
Okay, cool. And what is your ideal dosage of flaxseed?
So typically I would suggest doing 1 tablespoon to start, and always ground, because you'll poop out the whole flax seeds.
Yes.
And do you know what? I'm just going to touch on one other quick thing. If you are able to identify food in your poo, and I don't mean corn, corn doesn't count. This is a really good sign that you need digestive help, because your body is struggling to break down these foods. So you're actually not digesting the foods properly, which means you're not absorbing the foods either. And again, when we've got this constipated state happening, you're not going to be absorbing the vitamins and minerals, and it's going to lead to fatigue. And you're probably going to be a bit moody because of it.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. Flaxseed is always best with ground, because it just goes right out. I know that there's tests like corn and sesame seeds and stuff of just kind of seeing how long it's taking to transit out of your body. From the time you eat it, you kind of document that and seeing like, okay, when am I seeing corn come up? And I know that's a big indicator, like, okay, how fast is everything kind of moving through me?
Exactly. And that's a really great test to do. And I encourage people to give that a try. Have some corn tonight for dinner, and
organic
time. How long it's going to take to show up in your poo, because this is going to test time that it's taking your body to process foods and work through the system. So
yes, you gave us some really good tidbits. So ending it though, give us some natural ways we can keep things flowing. You can repeat kind of what you said too, and give a little summary.
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of laxatives. I'll just touch on that because it's
Mm-hmm.
always a popular question. The thing with laxatives is they can be dependency forming, especially the ones
Mm-hmm.
that are, stimulating that peristalsis or that movement of the muscle to push out your poo. They can become dependency forming, and that's a problem. The other ones that there's two different types of laxatives. The other ones draw water out of the body and into the stool to soften the stool. Those are also problematic because they're extremely dehydrating for your body.
Yes.
So what I like to typically suggest is relying on your fibers and your vegetables first and foremost, making sure you're well hydrated. If you're
Mm-hmm.
still finding you need help, we need to look at adjusting the diet and what foods you're consuming. If that still isn't working, then we might look at adding in something like triphala. The thing that I love about triphala, it's an Ayurvedic herb and it acts much like a laxative, but it is not dependency forming. And so it really works to balance the digestive system. And so triphala is a nice one to add in, as well as magnesium citrate. Again, magnesium citrate can be stimulating, so this is more short term. It's not meant to be used ongoing in high doses, I should say,
Right.
because it can really, again, give you that
Yes.
loosened bowel effect, right? So in other words, we're going to swing from constipation to you're going to be hugging the toilet and
Yes.
just glued to the toilet with diarrhea. So we don't want to go too far here.
Yes. No, I like magnesium citrate. I know magnesium is one of those nutrients that even when I found when I was formulating my multivitamin, there was like, this is the best form. No, this is the best form. And like, it's so magnesium, I feel like is one of the most confusing nutrients of like, okay, what's an actual good form of it? I like magnesium citrate and studies do show that it's very bioavailable. It does kind of help get you going if you are stuck.
Yeah,
So I do like that form. There's other forms too, and even magnesium transdermally is just as good,
yeah,
and you can absorb it. So I always like getting more of an array of different types of magnesium to cover my bases. Magnesium oxide, I think, is like probably the worst, like the least bioavailable. It's not really good, but
got it.
citrate, glycinate, like all those transdermally, magnesium sprays and Epsom salt baths can be very helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me over on my Facebook page at Soul Food Nutritionista, and I also have a private Facebook group. We've got recipes and lots of classes happening in there called Soul Food Community. I'm on Instagram at Soul Food Nutritionista, and yeah, you guys can hop over to my pages. And I also have a great Constipation Begone cheat sheet that's really helpful. It's free just to give you some more tools, my top foods, supplements, and lifestyle changes to really help you to keep things moving. And on an ongoing basis, you're not fluctuating in and out of constipation.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much.